Hello guys, welcome back to my channel, The Forgotten Storyteller. My name is Ren, if you are new here, which I think most of you who might watch this video will be. It is June 1st, which means that I should wrap up the books that I read last month and talk about maybe some potential plans for next month. So let's go ahead and get started. Last month, I read 4 books, which doesn't seem like a lot, but considering most months I've read maybe 1 book, this feels like a pretty big deal for me. I'm finally getting back into the groove of reading. I think part of this is that I finally have a car after a year of being back in the States, which means that while I'm driving places, I can listen to audiobooks. But also, I am officially done with school and done with being a teacher for the foreseeable future. So that frees up a lot of mental and emotional and honestly physical energy to devote to hobbies and other things. The first 2 books I read were by the same author. I don't have physical copies because I listened to them on audio, so I'll put a little picture up here somewhere. But they are When in Rome and Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. So both of these books are connected. They are a part of a companion series. Technically, it's advisable that you read When in Rome first, because that happens first chronologically, and then Practice Makes Perfect. I did them opposite. I read Practice Makes Perfect first, and then When in Rome. So it's not the end of the world if you read it that way, but it is, I think, better to read them in order. It just makes things a little bit easier, and then you're not spoiled for the first book by reading the second book. But these are books that are set in Rome, Kentucky, a very small town where a group of 4 siblings lives, and it's their love stories. I'm hoping that Sarah Adams does 2 books for the remaining 2 siblings that are left, because that would be awesome. These are your typical romance books. Pretty good overall. I really enjoyed them. The second one I think is my favorite, Practice Makes Perfect. The main character is a flower shop owner, and it's just, I think I relate to her character more, just in general. So both of these books earned a solid 4.5 stars on Copile. They were 8s across the board, with a 10 for enjoyment on Practice Makes Perfect, and a 9 for enjoyment on When in Rome. The next book I read in May was the Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. First of all, this cover just is stunning. This is the hardback. It doesn't have a dust jacket, which I actually really like. I kind of wish more books would do it this way. This is a book that many of you have probably seen, about a girl by the name of Emily Wilde. She's a professor at Cambridge, and she goes to a little teeny tiny town very far north to study a group of fairy folk that no one has really documented much about, in order to complete her Encyclopedia of Fairies. And she is joined by the uninvited fellow professor, Wendell Brambleby. You know, sometimes when you read a name and you just kind of gloss over it because you're reading it in your head, so you don't really have to. Anyway, this book is in a diary format, which is normally not my favorite format of book. I don't really like a letter format. I don't really like a diary format, but this really worked for the kind of story that Heather Fawcett was trying to tell. One of the things that I really appreciate about these diary entries is they have little footnotes, which I'm a sucker for footnotes in fiction. See, like, I like little footnotes. It's just, footnotes in fiction, I think, is such an underutilized tool, but it only fits like a very specific kind of narrative, so I know why they don't get used very often, but I'm a sucker for it. I love it. I am also convinced that Emily Wilde is an autistic coded character. She has too many autistic traits to not be an autistic coded character. I don't know whether Heather Fawcett intended that or whether that was intentional, but I love reading characters with heavy autistic traits, especially undiagnosed. It's really interesting because I see some of the other characters treat her, at least in the very beginning, the same way that a lot of undiagnosed autistic women get treated. Just this like, oh, you're so rude or loud or weird, or there's just like all of these things. And so I really enjoyed that aspect. It's a little bit slow getting into, but once I was about a third of the way through, one night last week, I sat down intending to just get a little bit of reading done, and all of a sudden it was 11:30 and I had finished the book. I read like 200 pages that evening. So needless to say, this is another 4.5, solid, really good. I've had a really good reading month this month. Not only have I read 4 whole books, but they've all been really good. And then the last book I listened to was A Quiet Life in the Country by T.E. Kinsley. This is a book about Lady Hardcastle and her lady's maid Flo, who have had all of these crazy adventures, and now they are going to settle down for a quiet life in the country. This is the first book in the Lady Hardcastle mystery series, so you can imagine that a quiet life doesn't quite work out the way that they intend it to when they, on like their second or third day, maybe even their first full day at the manor, they find a dead body hanging, which the cops at first rule as suicide, and Lady Hardcastle very astutely points out that it can't be suicide because of all of these different markers. This is a really interesting book, as I think Rob from PlayStation Access says it's a solid 7 out of 10 game, meaning it's not the most exciting or unique or elaborate game, but it is very good, very enjoyable, and just like exactly where it needs to be. And this is a solid 7 out of 10 book. I ended up giving this about a 3.5. This is my second time listening to it in preparation to continue listening to the series. It's just like a solid, cozy mystery. There's nothing particularly special about it. I enjoyed it. 3.5. And that is all of the books that I read in May. Now, most of these books I actually read in the last like 2.5 weeks of May. So the last half of May. So I'm excited to hopefully read more this month. And the only potential problem with that is that I am leaving the country for about 16 days, so a little over 2 weeks. So that kind of puts a damper. I am bringing a bunch of books for the school that I was working at in Albania for the library. So I don't know if I want to bring more books so that I can read. I don't really want to, nor enjoy reading on my Kindle. So I don't know. We'll have to figure it out. I'll see what happens, and go from there. So, talking about June reading plans. It is time to play the first round of my TBR game, Ticket to TBR, which is based off of the board game Ticket to Ride. This is a game in which you basically collect train cars by reading books to complete routes across this imaginary fantasy land that I have created using landmarks from some of my favorite books. So we'll do that in a second, but before we do that, there are 2 books that I would like to for sure get to this month. And the first one I've actually already started. I'll remove the thing from the cover. And that is Level Up by Scott Rogers. This is a very chunky book about video game design. If you know me, you know that I am leaving teaching for a number of reasons, but one of them is to pursue game design. And so while I wait to save up a little bit more money so that I can take some classes, I thought I would go ahead and dive into this book, which has been recommended to me. It's not quite as intimidating as it looks. The margins are super wide. I don't know if you can see that. Are super wide, and there's a ton of these really adorable cartoons that the author uses to kind of illustrate his points. He mentions in the introduction that his game design documents weren't really being read. Nobody really wanted to read them, so he started drawing cartoons to help convey his ideas, and more people read them, more people looked at his ideas, and so that's just kind of the way that he helps communicate his ideas and thoughts and opinions. So I'm about, let's see, I'm about 60 pages in so far. It's pretty good. It is definitely written predominantly for entry-level people, and he writes in a very simple way to make sure that it's accessible to everyone, which I really appreciate, because sometimes people who have been in an industry for a really long time, they pick up the lingo that they don't even realize that other people outside of the industry don't understand. And so far I haven't come across any of that, so I really appreciate that. I'm definitely going to be working on this book this month. The second book that I would like to get to this month is The Bone Ship by R.J. Barker. This is the broken binding edition, so it has kind of the standard cover for the most part, but then these beautiful stenciled edges, these lovely, lovely end papers, and then the embossed silver cover, hardback cover. So this is a, it's just the bookmark. So part of the reason why I would like to get to this book this month is that there is currently a readathon going on for this series, and we're reading the first book this month, the second book next month, and then the third book in August. The readathon is being hosted by the Library of a Viking on YouTube. He is a fantasy reader, has phenomenal taste in books, and so when he announced that he was doing this readathon, I thought, perfect, because I've been getting the copies of the broken binding editions and I don't want them to sit on my shelf and go to waste. To be perfectly honest, I don't really know what this is about besides there being ships and dragons and war. And you know, I'm actually okay with just knowing that. I will say the bookmark that I pulled out, wait, where did it go? I think I set it down somewhere. Oh no, it's right here. The bookmark that came with it, the back says, "I'll not deny the hag my love. Let us fly to her in pride. I'll not deny the hag my love. For duty have I died." So that's interesting. Yeah, some really great fantasy authors have read it and praised it and reviewed it. So I'm okay with not knowing what this book is about. Okay, so now let's get on to my Ticket to TBR game to help me kind of work out and decide the rest of my TBR. So I am ultimately a mood reader, but one of the things that is really important to me is reading diversely, hearing stories from lots of different people, lots of different kinds of stories. But in part because I'm a mood reader, and in part because that just naturally takes a lot of intentionality, I wanted to come up with some kind of game that encourages me to read outside of my comfort zone or read books that are diversely written or about diverse subjects, while still giving me the ability and freedom to mood read just so that I don't lose momentum with reading and reading at no point becomes a chore. So how this works is I will pull a card that is my route card, and my route card lasts until I finish it. So it could be 1 month, it could be 2 months, it could be a half a month. It really depends on the length of the route and how much I'm reading. And then I have a bunch of prompt cards in a little jar that I made, and I will pull a couple of prompts for the month. And if I read a book that fits that prompt, that book earns 2 train cards instead of 1. So I can fill 2 blocks on the route between stops rather than 1. If I read a book in the genre, but it doesn't fit one of the prompt cards that I've pulled for the month or that week, or it just really depends on how much I'm reading, then it's only worth 1 card or 1 train slot. So let's readjust, and I will take you down to the floor for Ticket to TBR. Okay, here is the Ticket to Ride board. I'm gonna have to figure out a better angle for this. These are the route cards. So I'm going to take out the title that says route cards. I'm gonna give them a little bit of a shuffle. Probably now that I'm back in the States, I can probably make like better versions of these now that I have access to some more materials. I think my last video, the last video on my channel, was me making this board and kind of the process and an explanation of the rules. So here are the route cards, and I am just going to pick one. So the first route, will it focus, is Rathalas to Asland. Well, there's Asland. Oh, and here's Rathalas. This is my card. So this is Rathalas, and there is, or Aslan, and then Rathalas. So it looks like, oh, so sorry. I did something to my back, and boy, it is causing me problems. And so much pain. So I have 2 options of routes. I can go this way up and then this way. So through Carval, the spine, and then up to Rathalas. Or I can go to Mount Eskel, Arius, and then up to Rathalas. Either way, it's 3 routes, and I do have a silver on both routes. So the silver is a free-for-all. It means I can pick any genre that I want for this route, but the genre must stay the same. So if I choose fantasy for this first slot, I have to do fantasy for all of these slots, right? And let's talk about the colors real quick, because that will be helpful. This dark green is mystery slash thriller, if I ever want to read a thriller, which I don't really see myself doing so. I don't really love thriller books, but that fits there. As a note, these categories are really flexible, so it just needs to have mystery elements in it as an important part of the story. Is kind of the main characteristic. This dark blue color here, this is my fantasy. Most of my really long tracks are fantasy for the most part, because that's what I read the most of. This kind of purpley, metallic purpley color is historical fiction. And then dark green is mystery. Oh, this like brick color is contemporary. And then, oh, here's one. These kind of like tannish, mustardy yellow, weird colors, which are coming across more green on the camera, but they're a little bit more like goldy yellow in real life. This is nonfiction. Most of my nonfiction is maximum 3. So there's 2, there's 1, 3. I guess technically that's 4 because, anyway. So yes, this is my board. There's kind of a more detailed explanation of everything in the making of it and all of that on my channel. So now let's pull some prompts. So let me take this. Okay. That should be good. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. This is my jar of prompts. There we go. So let's try for 4 prompts. That's the number of books I read last month. So let's see. And also there's no penalty for not using a prompt. It'll just go back in the jar to be used later. Okay. So the first one, come on, focus, buddy. The first one is read a book that has won an award. Okay. That's a good prompt. I wonder if I have any that have won awards. So that's prompt number 1. Prompt number 2. Okay. Read a funny book. Interesting. I don't read many funny books. Okay, and then ooh, this is perfect. Read a book inspired by Asian mythology. I like that. I wonder if the Jasmine Throne is inspired by Asian mythology or just like Asian culture. But I might consider like culture and mythology not to be interchangeable because they're not, but to like count towards the same thing. Basically, it's a book that centers around Asian mythology or folklore or history or culture. Okay, cool. Last one for now. And that is, ooh, a historical event that you know little about. Okay, I really like that. So those are my 4 prompts. We have read a funny book, a historical event that you know little about, a book inspired by Asian mythology, and a book that has won awards. Okay, and then I can either have a root of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's 3 either way. So my route options are 3 contemporary, 4 mystery, 6 silver, or 4 historical fiction, 4 silver, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fantasy. I think really what it comes down to is, do I want to read historical fiction, fantasy, and a genre of my choice, or contemporary mystery and a genre of my choice, which would likely be fantasy. Hold on, let me look at my book collection and see. It's a little bit later, hence the lighting changed. I turned off my camera to look around and do some research, got distracted. My brain was like, oh, you should do laundry. Anyway, ADHD, funness, But I am not picking all of my books to fulfill the route, but I am starting off with what I think might be manageable this month. So this is kind of the finished, very loose TBR, and we'll see what happens as we go along. I don't want to get that on my... So, for a historical event you know a little about, I decided to go the route of historical fiction, genre of my choice, fantasy, in order to complete my route. So the first book to fulfill this prompt is a historical fiction, and it is The Last Kingdom by Bernard Cornwell. This is a book that is about the Vikings in the 9th century, and I know basically nothing about the 9th century, particularly Viking related. There's also a TV series that's quite popular that this book was based off of, or that the TV series was based off the book, not the other way around. So this will represent 2 spaces in the historical fiction route. So that's 2 of 4, 2 because I have a little prompt. For the book that is inspired by Asian mythology or culture, I am going to be reading The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. I'm very excited about this book. I've been wanting to read this book forever. This is about a princess who's trapped by her brother within the crumbling walls of a temple. And she starts to dream of freedom, and there's wild magic and turbulent uprisings and a maidservant, and yeah, it sounds really good. I'm really excited to read it. Again, this will be 2 spots, 2 train cars on the fantasy route. And then representing 1 train car on the fantasy route is The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker, which I've already talked about. And then I'm trying to decide if I would like Level Up to count towards my ticket to TBR. I do have 4 spaces of silver, so I could do nonfiction. And then read a funny nonfiction book and maybe a nonfiction book that's won an award. This is my rough TBR for June. Again, I'm leaving for 2 weeks, so we'll see how it goes. I don't know that I want to bring a special edition to the other side of the world. I'm worried about ruining it. But maybe I could bring The Last Kingdom because it's thin and kind of lighter in paperback. But we will see how it goes, and I will keep you updated. Alright guys, that wraps up my May wrap-up. I keep wanting to say March. My May wrap-up and June rough TBR. The first round of Ticket to TBR. I will see you guys later, and thank you so much for watching. Please like if you liked the video and subscribe if you would like to. I plan to do some bookish videos, some video game videos, maybe some crafting and hobby videos, book journaling, miniature painting. This is kind of a channel for me to make videos about stories, whether they be in the form of books or games or tabletop role-playing, whatever it may be. I hope that you join me for this adventure. Have a nice day, guys.